Hello there. My name is Chris Haynes, past District Deputy for District 2 and current Chairman of the Grand Lodge Real Estate Advisory Committee. Welcome to this week's video covering important topics impacting masonry and our lodges here in Washington. Over the past several months, I've heard from a few lodges with questions regarding leases and rental agreements. In our jurisdiction, we have some lodges who own buildings that have long-term tenants who have either lease agreements set for a period of time over several years or on a month-to-month basis. We also have some lodges who own buildings that are a single-use building, like an assembly hall, that they rent out for events or provide space for ongoing classes and recurring group meetings. And finally, we have lodges who don't own buildings, but they are tenants who rent space in buildings owned by others to hold their meetings and special communications. Many of the questions we have received have been concerned with the growing realization that the rents that are being charged may not be keeping up with the rising costs of owning and operating our buildings. Sometimes lodges are more afraid of scaring off an existing tenant rather than adjusting the rent to cover increased operating costs and possibly having to find a different tenant. When this happens over time, lodges run the risk of what we call rent erosion, and their rental revenue doesn't keep up with the rising costs of operating our lodges. How does this happen? I first want to talk about two different types of leases that lodges can have with their long-term tenants. One type of lease is called a gross lease, and the other type is called a triple net lease. A gross lease basically sets a single fixed amount to be paid each month over a period of time, like a year or more. Sometimes a gross lease can include a percentage increase in that fixed amount each year. Say like over a 5-year period, each year the rent is going to go up 2 or 3% per year. A gross lease is easy to figure out, and the landlord and the tenant can negotiate what that percentage increase would be each year at the beginning of that lease period, but that's if they even negotiate a rent increase. The other type of lease is a triple net lease, where a base rent is established and the tenant's portion of the property's operating expenses, usually calculated as a percentage of the square footage of the overall building that they occupy, is added on top of that base rent. Over a 5-year lease, the portion of operating expenses is calculated each year and adjusted annually for that tenant. The operating expenses typically include things like taxes, insurance, maintenance of the common areas, and the exterior of the building, capital improvements whose costs are spread out over a number of years. While the gross lease is easy to calculate, lodges run the risk of setting it and forgetting it. On the other hand, while it takes just a little bit more work to keep track of the building expenses, a triple net lease automatically forces the lodge to know what its operating expenses are for each year and pass those increased expenses on to their tenant. Another way that lodges can help prevent rent erosion is to conduct a physical inspection of their building every year just by simply walking around it, say, after each winter. But also think about having every 3 to 5 years having an inspector do a full inspection of the building so lodges know how their buildings are aging and plan for replacing and repairing different components of the buildings like roofs, flashing, heating and cooling systems, painting, drainage, electrical, plumbing, and so forth. If a lodge has long-term leases, a rental analysis should be done before any lease is renewed. And if a lodge has a long-term tenant that is renting month to month, these lodges should consider conducting a rental analysis with the help of a trusted commercial real estate broker who handles commercial leases and can access information about what commercial lease rates are for similar types of rental properties in that lodge's market. If a lodge is a single-use building, rental rates usually can be obtained from other single-use venues like church halls, conference rooms, other lodges, and the like, by visiting those sites and seeing how they compare to what the lodge has to offer. Finally, another key way that lodges can prevent rent erosion is to have their lease agreements prepared by an attorney who specializes in that area of work and also consider working with a commercial real estate broker who uses attorney-prepared lease agreements. A well-written lease that is enforceable will clearly establish expectations for both the tenant and the lodge. In all this talk about lodges who own buildings, I want to be sure to address those lodges and concordant Masonic bodies who rent space for their meetings, which in many cases are owned by other lodges, Scottish Rite Valleys, and other building owners. You play an important role in helping those building owner-operators generate the revenue they need to maintain and improve those buildings. Let them know what they need to repair and have building use agreements that clearly spell out what landlord and tenant responsibilities are and how issues are to be communicated and handled promptly. By having lodges through their temple boards or building associations actively engaged in knowing what their expenses are and establishing appropriate rental rates, they have a much better chance of not just surviving, but thriving as pillars in their respective communities. That's it for this week's topic. If there are any questions that you want our Real Estate Advisory Committee to address in a video presentation, please email us at the address that follows this video. Thank you for watching, and remember that by taking care of our buildings, we're taking care of our Masonic families as one Masonic family living united.